Kirby and the Rainbow Curse is finally out. And if you've been listening to the podcast for the past, 10 months since E3 of last year, you know I've been freaking out about this game. Is it as good as its predecessor? Is it completely fucking easy like all the Kirby games have been for the past decade? Well, grab a seat, you're about to find out. So when I first saw the announcement trailer for Kirby and the Rainbow Curse last year, I lost my shit. I'm going to be honest with you. I really didn't expect this game to ever exist. Rainbow Curse is more or less the spiritual follow-up to Kirby's Canvas Curse, which was one of my favorite original DS games. It's a great game not just because, it just had these really innovative mechanics, but it was an early DS game, and it was one of the first, maybe the first DS game that proved that you can make cool, unique games using a touchscreen. Prior to that, it just seemed like a gimmick. Games used it for camera control and whatnot, and it just didn't work that well. And then Canvas Curse came along, and they were like, hey, this system has a reason to exist. The reason I never thought we'd get a sequel was because then the 3DS came out. And the 3DS, it's a great system, but because of the top screen, which is a wide screen, and because of the 3D gimmick for the system, you stopped getting games where the gameplay was on the touchscreen. And a lot of games from the DS era played like this. Games like those Zelda games, like Elite Beat Agents and Oindon, and of course Kirby's Canvas Curse, all had you controlling, the character or the gameplay with the stylus. But this didn't exist on 3DS, and I never thought we'd get this game, but sure enough, they announced it for the Wii U, which kind of makes sense because the Wii U is sort of like a big DS, where, you have a touchscreen that you can stare down at, and that's what I'm hearing is a big complaint for a lot of people with this new Kirby game, and it's this beautiful game with these great claymation graphics, and it really does look nice, but you're always staring down at the pad, and the pad it doesn't have the greatest resolution. It's just not very sharp, and you kind of even lose some of the claymation effect. Ultimately, it doesn't bother me that much because if you didn't make that sacrifice, this game wouldn't exist. This type of game that existed in the DS era would just go away. I know we have like tablets and phones and whatnot, but these capacitive touchscreens just don't have the same kind of fidelity that you had with the stylus in a DS. So I'm glad this exists. It proves that that type of game can still work. And for the most part, Kirby's and the Rainbow Curse works great. It is very much the follow-up to Canvas Curse, and it plays very similar. There are some small changes here and there, which some of them kind of bum me out, but I understand. For one, Kirby can no longer absorb the powers of the enemies that he kills, which has kind of been a staple in Kirby since almost the beginning, and it was there in Canvas Curse as well. And it was kind of a big bummer for me, but I started to understand why they did that. Kirby's Epic Yarn came out, several years ago, and it was a great game, but it wasn't a traditional Kirby game because you couldn't absorb these powers. Instead, what they did is they had levels where you would transform into various Kirby vehicles. And just like in that game, sure enough, this game, instead of absorbing powers, has levels where you play as a transformation to Kirby, which, for the most part, these do work. I think the tank is a little slow, but the sub and the rocket, they're really cool. All these vehicles control very differently. For the sub, you can kind of move them where you want, but you use the rainbow paths that you make with the stylus to steer his torpedoes that are constantly shooting. While the rocket is constantly moving straight forward, and you have to use the rainbow lines to kind of steer them around the stage, and the tank just kind of plays like a shooter where you're tapping where you want to shoot. So yeah, I think these levels are fine, but there is something to be said about not having any power-ups because, hey, they're power-ups and they make you feel powerful, and power-ups have always been really great in Kirby games, so I do miss them. But that's not the only change that this game has made over Canvas Curse that kind of puzzles me a little bit. It's that you can no longer stun enemies by tapping on them. Before, you would just kind of, draw a line towards an enemy, you tap an enemy, and as Kirby would touch it, it would kill it. Now you have to Kirby dash in them by tapping on Kirby into an enemy to kill it. This makes it a much more of a precision game, and you can't just sort of lazily draw lines around and tap on enemies. You actually gotta try this time, and I think that's why some people might find this game frustrating, but I find it kind of satisfying coming from Canvas Curse and having to be a little more dexterous with this game. They also added a new mechanic where you collect 100 stars and you can charge up Kirby and he becomes giant and really powerful and he can break through bricks. It's a nice idea, but I don't think they do enough with it. It's just not as cool as a regular Kirby power-up. Other than that, it's just a really well-made and fun follow-up to an already great idea. Some of the new stuff that I like are the fluid dynamics. You can now draw lines to divert waterfalls that might be getting in Kirby's way, or to block lava from falling on Kirby. And it's not innovative, it's just super satisfying. But hey, maybe I just really like fluids, I don't know. The game is just peppered with all kinds of cool new ideas that you expect from any Nintendo platformer you see these days. There's a level where Kirby splits up, which, we've seen before, but when you're controlling them via these colored lines on the touchscreen, it's like way more hectic than you ever would have thought. There's levels where he's riding on gondolas and you're drawing the gondola lines that he can't fall off of with the touchscreen. It's just cool, smart ideas that are used in new, fresh ways every time you see them, pop up again. That's what makes this just a great platformer. If there's one big improvement over Canvas Curse that Rainbow Curse has, it's in its boss fights and its boss design. Canvas Curse didn't really have much in the way of bosses. It had these weird mini games that you did after you beat a world that just kind of felt out of place. But here you have really cool, well-designed bosses, and even when a boss repeats, there's like a cool new twist to it, like you typically see in Mario games. And then there's the challenge rooms, which is kind of one of the bigger surprises of this game. The campaign itself only took about 6 or 7 hours for me, which is not very long, kind of on the same length of Canvas Curse, but this new game has all these challenge rooms. I think there's maybe 100 of them, and each one of these challenge rooms has 4 different challenges in them. And they're these short 15-second challenges that really utilize all the different ways you can control Kirby or his different forms and all the different little mechanics distilled down to quick, short little bursts of puzzles or twitch mechanics. And it's really satisfying to go through all these challenges and to see the clever ways that they use these mechanics, and it adds a lot of game time and replay value as you're trying to get gold medals and perfect all of these. I was really surprised to see this addition, and I was glad for it as well. So ultimately, yeah, Kirby's in the Rainbow Curse is this really well-made platformer with a lot of really great ideas, the kind of stuff we see from Nintendo a lot. If there's anything kind of holding this back from maybe truly being one of Nintendo's greats, it's just that it just feels a little small, a little slight compared to some of the great platformers of Nintendo's history. A game like Super Mario World or Super Mario 64 didn't just have great level design with some clever ideas sprinkled here and there. It had this cohesive structure that sort of tied it all together. It had great world design with secrets that weren't just contained to a single stage, that secrets that would send you back to previous stages, unlocking new things, which would open up new paths and help you discover areas that you didn't even think would exist. Kirby just it doesn't have that. It has these, you just go from level to level, you fight the bosses, you can do the challenge rooms, and then it's over. I don't want to hold it against the game, but there's just something like an idea or two missing that's keeping it from true greatness. Canvas Curse stood out on the fact that it was the first game to really prove the DS's worth. This doesn't really have that. It's just a really fun follow-up. Maybe if it had some better unlockables, but you unlock these little figurines that don't really do much in a music room, which is nice because I will say the soundtrack to this game is fucking amazing, but they just feel like things to do in a game that has kind of just run its course. And I'm not going to hold it against Rainbow Curse. I think it's a really great game. I just kind of wanted to get that off my chest. In the end, I really enjoyed my time with this game. Kirby and the Canvas Curse might not be the system-defining innovator that its predecessor was, but it is just as fun. It proves that stylus-based Twitch gameplay didn't have to die with the original DS. And it doesn't hurt that Nintendo has another platforming series that is just as good as Mario. So I highly recommend this game.